Okay, I've gone ahead and cleared our scene out, and I've also brought out our preview window a little by pulling on this bar. And also, if you take a look, if we pull it out too far, you notice our layer panel will come out uh, really stretched out, and you really can't edit this too much. So you need to make sure that you're kind of watching it as you're pulling this bar out to make sure that this preview window doesn't get thrown all the way up there. Unless you're working with multiple layers, several layers, several dozen, that could be definitely a nice thing to have all of those, all that space. I'm going to bring that back how we were. And now we're going to take a look at some of our lighting options. And our lights, we can all be accessed right here. And most of the stuff too can also be accessed up here. If we go to objects, we can go add light, and we have all of our lights in here as well. Plus their keyboard shortcuts show up. But if we look at the interface, the actual interface, we can go ahead and right mouse click right here. And there's three major types of lights. We have point lights, spotlights, and our sunlight, which is a directional light. And we also have two variations of two of them. So we have a point light, a quadric point light, a spotlight, and a quadric spotlight. I'm going to load up the point light really quick here. And if we take a look at that, it's casting rays sort of as a light bulb would. Also by default, if we go up here to our settings, you notice there's a lens flare on. We can right mouse click on that and say no lens flare, and now that lens flare won't show up, and we can see just the effect that it's having on the ground. And you can go ahead and if you select the point light down here, you can edit its power, how bright it is. You can see that increasing. I'm going to go ahead and select this ground and click the arrow right here and just load up a darker texture for this ground so we can see it a little bit better. I'm going to use just one of these. This one looks nice and dark. Click OK. And we'll let that refresh. And that's a little stretched out because that's more of a terrain texture. So I'm just going to actually go back to the default, click OK, double click on the preview up here, and we can, under colors, double click on that and select solid colors, and we can go down to that rust color, click OK, and now we can see that spotlight that point light pretty well. Go back to our point light, and as you can see, we can adjust the power up pretty high, and the softness overall, as you can see, it's adjusting the kind of the fall off there. And we can also adjust the color of the light. Double click here, and let's select a blue. You can see it shows up as a blue tint. And with lights, you're not going to be able to get extremely vibrant colors out of them because it is light. But you will be able to get a nice tint of whatever it is you're going for. Plus it reacts with whatever it is you're lighting up. So it is still kind of orangish because the ground is that rust color. What we could also do is set up volumetric lighting. And all of the lights have these options on the side right here. And if we go up here, just above our light cast shadows, you can turn on shadows or turn them off, depending on what you're rendering. If we throw a object there right now, you can see its shadow is being created. And we have a little bit of distortion here, and the reason for that is our softness. Turn our softness off, that goes away. And softness does not look good in a preview render, but it will look good in the final render. And depending on what you're anti-aliasing and how many passes you have total. We're going to go back to that point light and the shadows. If we turn off shadows and click OK, you'll see that that shadow is removed. And this first shadow right here is actually being caused by our sun. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over here, and we're going to turn shadows back on. And then you can see that's the shadow right here for this sphere. We can move that around and move it right there. What we can also do is, if we go back to our point light, for the volumetrics, left mouse click on here, and as you can see, that created a very large volumetric effect on there. If we change the power, it will reduce that on our volume. And we also have shadows being cast by this ball that we have added from the volumetric light, and we get nice light beams around that ball. We could also specifically go in and edit these volumetric light options. So if we right mouse click and go to edit volume settings, we can adjust our intensity. Of course, we can't get a preview right now until this is done. And we can adjust our quality, whether we want fast render or better, which is going to take a lot longer to render. You can also enable cast shadows for this light volume too, and show smoke or dust in the light beam, which will add little flecks here and there. But I'm going to adjust the intensity, or bring it down, so we can bring our power back up on that light. And as you can see, it's still pretty bright. So we'll right mouse click on that again, edit volume settings, and the intensity. And we'll bring down our quality boost, click OK, and zoom out a little and take a look at that. And as you can see, that's a very large volumetric light. So you will have to adjust the settings of the power on that in order to get it correct. But as you can see, that's a pretty neat effect to have a nice volume on there. What you could also do is add a gel. And now gels are, in real life, it's kind of putting different colors over the front of a light. But in this case, what we can do is add pictures or anything like that, and it will project that image. You can even add textures and things like that, and it will project it onto objects around it. And it will also affect our volume lighting. So to add a gel, you can just click on that with the left mouse button, and we could pick a texture. I'll take complex rock because that'll show up really well. And only simple materials can be used as gels, and you can see that here. And what that means is, if we take a look at our material editor really quick, and we're going to go to that sphere, and we're going to double click here, and under type we have simple material and mixed material, and also volumetric and ecosystem. We'll cover that in a little bit. But these mixed materials are multiple materials combined to create different types of effects. So we have to make sure that we have a simple material for that light gel. So I'm going to close that out. I'm going to double click on the, go to this arrow again, and we select something that looks like it's a little less complex, and maybe that rock. There we go. And that rock is a simplified material, a simple material, and not mixed. Close that out. You can see this applied our material to our actual object and not to our light. But I did that just so we can check and see in the surface editor exactly what the simplified material is. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this, and we can double click right here too, and that'll also bring us to our chooser. I'm going to set that back to our default. Click OK, and select our point light again. Go to gel options, or, well, not quite the options. We could just load something in just by left mouse clicking on it. We're going to select that texture again, that rock. Click OK, and it edited our volume light. You can't really tell too much because of this specific texture, but if we take a look at the ground and the way it's casting light, you'll see the beams are coming out a little more erratic than they were before, because it's casting that specific material onto the ground and the objects around it. As you can see, it's just to have these little tiny flecks in here, and those are pretty much the bumps that we have in that material. And we also have light rays coming out of the sides, and you can pretty much just vary it by loading different light gels. And like I said too, with spotlights and certain things like that, you could actually project pictures onto certain things, and that gives kind of a neat effect. You could also edit the options for this. Edit gel, which is just pretty much our material editor. And you can also set that to, if you want to project an image, set that to mapped picture, and then you could load your image by clicking the arrow right there. I'm going to close that out and close that out. And now we're going to take a look at our other type of light. I'm going to turn off the light gel. Right mouse click on it and turn off light has gel. And I'm also going to turn off our volumetric lighting on this. Right mouse click, turn off volumetric light, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this sphere. And because our settings are a little low, I can turn that up, or I can just go ahead and delete that. And to get our default settings back, right mouse click right here and select our point light again, and we'll just turn off the lens flare. And I'm going to show you a quadric point light. Right mouse click again, and this kind of square looking round point light. Click on that, and we can go to no lens flare again. And as you can see, they're pretty much right next to each other. But if we take a look at the light it's casting on the ground, you'll notice that the right one doesn't really show up as much. But if we click on the lights and we take a look up here, you'll notice that our settings are exactly the same for them. And that's because a quadric point light will dissolve quicker, or the light will fade away a lot quicker than a standard point light. And it's just got a bigger fall off on it. And the same thing goes with our quadric spotlight. So I'm going to close or clear these out of the scene just by clicking on them and hitting the delete key. What you can also do is click on the layer down here and select this little trash can down here, and that will delete the objects, or anything in the scene actually. Now we want to click on this again. You can either left mouse click and hold down on it, or you can right mouse click to pull this up. We're going to select a spotlight. We zoom out a little so you can see our spotlight. And we're going to pull this down so we can see it just a little bit better, because that's kind of high up in the air right now. And you can see the effect that we're getting on the ground from that spotlight. Now there's a lot more options when you're editing a spotlight. You have your softness, like we did before, but we also have spread. And what spread is, if we pull that up, it adjusts how big the radius is for that spotlight. You can make it really small, or you can make it even up to 90 degrees. So it's sort of like a Boolean at 90 degrees of a point light. We also have fall off. And now watch these rings right here as I adjust the fall off, and you'll see they increase. And what that's doing, if you watch the preview window too, is it has a gradient of the fall off throughout these two circles. So this area in between here is where it's brightest right here and darkest right here, all the way down to nothing. So we can adjust that fall off and get a nice smooth edge if we wanted to. We could also adjust our power, just like we had before on the other one. And there's another thing here too. If you take a look, this is our wireframe color. If I click off, you'll see that this is yellow. We could also change this to any other color we want. And by doing that, we can actually set up sort of a grouping selection. So if I was to create another point light, and we'll go ahead and find that, and that's up here. I'll just drag that down, and we can change this to that blue as well. And now you're probably wondering, what does that achieve? Well, it shows up in here both as blue, but what we can do is, let's say we have a bunch of different lights that all have this blue setting, and we want to select all of them. We can click any of the blue objects in the scene and select by wireframe color, which is right over here, and that's going to go ahead and select everything of that wireframe color in the view. You could also, with those both selected, change to like a purple, and now we have them both as purple. So now if we select the purple one and do the same thing again, you notice it'll select those two. If I add another point light just to show you how it's not selecting any other color, and we zoom out here, pull this down, deselect it, make sure the color is yellow, and it is, and now we select the purple one again, and we hit that button. As you can see, it's still selecting only the purple ones. If we do that with the yellow and hit it, it's not gonna, sorry, wrong button. It's gonna select the whole area, and got a little bit of a glitch right there. But that's okay. You can kind of see the idea that it's selecting the wireframe color, and you can do that with objects, terrains, anything like that if you don't want to set up any grouping. You can group, and I will show you that once we get to creating more complex objects. So we can delete those from the scene, and there's also the quadric spotlight, which works the same way as the quadric point light. So it pretty much has the same settings, except the fall off is much quicker. And our last one is a directional light. And a directional light is pretty much just the sun. And we already have a sun in the scene, so now we just loaded in this other light, and now we have another sun in the scene. So you can pretty much add as many suns as you want, and depending on what planet you might want to be modeling. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And we're going to go down right here. And actually I want to take a look at our spotlight again. Just kind of show you what the gels can do with the spotlight, because it is a little bit different effect than you would get with a point light. We're going to take a look at the ground, and we're going to go up to here to gel, and we're going to do load gel, and we're going to go ahead and select the stone 3 texture. And as you can see, now it's projecting that texture quite well. And I'll go ahead and pull that down just so it's a lot closer to the ground plane, and it's going to look a lot brighter. Zoom in here. We can also adjust our power. And now you can see how bright that is. And now it's projecting that texture onto the ground. And you can also, like I said, do that with images, and it will project the image onto whatever it is it's shining onto. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And now we're going to take a look at MetaBlob objects. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go File, New. And it's going to ask me to select a sky. And I just want to use kind of our default sky. So I'm going to go to Basic. And I'm not sure which one's the actual default, but I'll do Clear Spring. It's pretty close. And we're going to say no, we don't want to save it. And that's pretty much our default screen that we get. And I'm going to go ahead and add a sphere. And right mouse click and add a cylinder. And put it right next to it. And now we're going to create a MetaBlob object. Now if you've worked in any other 3D software program before, there is also MetaBalls, which you might be familiar with. But MetaBlobs are a little more powerful than that, but pretty much the same principle. If we go ahead and select these two, holding down Shift, you can go ahead and click on another object. You can also do the same thing in the layer panel down here, and click on that. Now if you notice this thing right here, it's a little weird blob looking thing, you can select Create MetaBlob Object. And what that's going to do is blend together any objects that you have selected. So now we have a nice, I'm going to go ahead and select that so our camera movement can rotate around it. But as you can see, we have a nice smoothing effect around each of the objects. Now what we can also do, if we go ahead and double click on that as an object as a whole, we can adjust the distances of when they affect each other, how close they have to be to affect each other, and pretty much how much they're smoothing themselves out. I'm going to turn that down a little lower. And you can adjust the intensity as well. And we're getting a little bit of a glitch in there. If you take a look at the preview, you can see that it refined it a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and delete these now. And now I'm going to add, right mouse click, select sphere, right mouse click again, add another sphere, put it right next to it. Go ahead and select these two objects, click the MetaBlob button, and now we have them smoothed. And if we take a look now, like I said, we could adjust by double clicking how intense that is. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to leave it at 100%, but let's say we want to adjust individual blobs. As you can see, when we created that MetaBlob object, it created a separate set and sort of grouped them together. So I'm going to select sphere 3, and now we have just that one sphere in the MetaBlob object. So I'm going to double click on it, and now we can adjust specifically for that object, and we can pull it down, and I can see it shrinking. And if I click OK, now we can see our preview render, and as you can see, that shrank down quite a bit. So it's kind of a neat method of modeling, and it works with any of the primitive shapes except the plane and the alpha plane. But you can do it with any object, and you can model some pretty complex objects with that. If we take a look, go File, Open. Here's some sample scenes in here, and what we can do is select the Meta Horse, which comes on the Content CD. And not going to save it, and we're going to load it up. And if you take a look at this horse here, it is entirely modeled with MetaBlob objects. And as you can see, it's pretty high resolution, it looks pretty good, but it's entirely made of cones and spheres and cylinders and all different types of primitive shapes. And we can go in and select the different ones and really take a look at what you can do with it. And each one is adjusted differently, and you can just model some pretty neat objects that way by using MetaBlob. So it is pretty powerful, and you can do some really neat stuff with it. I'm going to go ahead and click New, and we're not going to save it, so we're going to click No. Okay, now we're going to take a look at other types of modeling, Booleans, which are pretty neat. I'm going to load up a sphere and load up another one, put it right next to it, and we're going to take a look at the Boolean difference option. If we go ahead and select both of these spheres, we can click and drag this box over them, or we can select one individually, hit Shift, or we could also go down here and hold down Shift and select the two together. And if you take a look on the side over here, we have a Boolean difference option. If we right mouse click, we also get other types of Booleans. We have Boolean union and Boolean intersection. We're going to take a look at difference right now, and we're going to select that. And as you can see, what it did was it cut a hole in our other object with itself. So you can do this with any of the primitive objects to cut holes in things, or any other object. You will notice that we do get kind of a sharp crease on the end right there, right along there. But you can go ahead and do this with just about anything. If we add another object here, let's say we'll add a cone, and we'll go in here and we'll just stick that right in the side and select Boolean difference again, making sure you're selecting the object you want to cut first and then the cutting object second. And as you can see, we have that cut from the cone also going into that object. Now what we can also do is, there's different types of Booleans. I'm going to select our cone and delete that, and we're also going to select our difference and delete it, and we're just going to start out fresh with two new spheres, and I'm going to show you intersection. If we go ahead and select these two, select the one we want to have cut and our cutting one, and then go over here, right mouse click, and we're going to go to intersection. What that does is leave behind the two sections that are kind of touching each other. So you can do some pretty neat modeling that way too. Go ahead and select that so we can move our camera around it. And as you can see, it's just a kind of a neat modeling technique for doing specific types of objects. I'm going to delete this again, and we're going to go up and create two new spheres again, and now I'm going to show you union. So we're going to select these two. And unless you're really doing difference, it doesn't really matter too much which order they're selected. We're going to go back in here and select union this time. And what this actually did was deleted all of our inside geometry and sort of what the intersection like we had before, that shape. That's all deleted in the inside. You can't really tell with a union unless you're using transparent objects. So if I go ahead and select the surface on here, double click, we're going to go to transparency. Under global transparency, just up it a bit and click OK. And you can see we can't see those polygons on the inside, and that's because they're joined together. But if we were to delete the union, or just go ahead and delete the whole thing, add two spheres, and we can select the two together, go back to our material editor, and bring our transparency up again. Now you can see that our polygons are inside. So doing that union will help smooth things out depending on what type of model you're doing. And it mostly works good for doing transparent objects. There's not many other uses for it unless you're doing transparent objects. So we can go ahead and just delete those now. I also want to talk about grouping now. You can group objects together. Let's say you model a spacecraft, and instead of having to go in and select every single object, you can create a group for it, and it will show up in your layer. I'm just going to load in some random primitives here and just kind of scatter them about. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is select all of these objects and hit this little button above the Boolean, which is going to create a group out of it. Now if we click any one of these objects, it will select the whole group. And if you notice down here in the layers, if we expand that, we have a group, and it shows each individual object in the group. And we can move those independently. But once we select one of the objects, one of the other objects, it will select the whole group. What we could also do is click in here, and you could name the group to pretty much whatever you want, or whatever it is you're grouping together. Like I said, if you're modeling a spaceship or something, you can group it all together, and then you can just select one piece of it, and the whole thing will be grouped. Let's go ahead and delete that. And now we're going to take a look at creating skies.